In a quiet Florentine workshop centuries ago, a hand moved across parchment, each stroke reshaping the world not with swords or speeches, but with vision. A flying machine, a dissected heart, a mysterious smile that would outlive empires. His name was Leonardo da Vinci, painter, inventor, engineer, anatomist. A mind that saw no boundaries, only connections between nature, art, and science. But behind the legend lies a deeper story of struggle, of wonder, and a relentless quest to understand everything. How did a boy born out of wedlock in rural Tuscany come to define the Renaissance? Why did he leave so much unfinished, and what does his life reveal about the power of imagination? This is the journey of Leonardo da Vinci, not just the genius, but the man. We'll follow his rise in Florence, his masterworks in Milan, his restless inventions, and his final days in France. We'll open the pages of his notebooks, gaze into his portraits, and walk through the mind of one of history's most extraordinary thinkers. Because to understand Leonardo is to understand ourselves. So join us on a journey through time, art, and discovery. This is Leonardo. The story of Leonardo da Vinci begins not in a grand palace or noble court, but in the gentle hills of Tuscany. In the spring of 1452, in the small town of Vinci, a boy was born under a sky heavy with the scent of blooming olives and wet earth. He was born illegitimate. His mother, Caterina, a peasant girl of humble standing. His father, Ser Piero, a respected notary in the nearby town. Their union was brief, and their child, though cherished, would not be raised in a conventional home. Illegitimacy in those days often meant exclusion from formal education, from inheritance, from opportunity. But for Leonardo, it may have been a strange kind of freedom. Without the burden of a noble path to follow, his mind wandered early and wandered far. He lived first with his mother, then later with his father and stepmother in Vinci. The town itself was unremarkable, a quiet place of farms and fields where the rhythms of life moved with the seasons. Yet for Leonardo, it was a landscape alive with detail. As a boy, he wandered the countryside. He watched the way birds soared and dipped through the air, how water twisted and pooled between stones, how light played across leaves and shadows shifted on distant hills. He began to draw, not to impress, but to understand. His notebooks, later in life, would recall these childhood observations. A dragonfly's wings, the spiral of a shell, the anatomy of a frog. Even as a child, he was not content with surface impressions. He wanted to know why things worked, how they moved, and what lay beneath their skin. But the world of Vinci could not contain such a mind forever. His father, recognizing the boy's uncommon talent, took him to Florence, the beating heart of the Renaissance. Here, amid the bustle of merchants, scholars, and artists, Leonardo would begin his formal training. He was around 14 years old when he was apprenticed to Andrea del Verrocchio, a master craftsman whose workshop produced everything from paintings and sculptures to military equipment and theatrical sets. For Leonardo, it was a revelation. Verrocchio's studio was no ordinary classroom. It was a forge of creativity where the boundaries between disciplines melted. One day, Leonardo might grind pigments for paint. The next, he might study the casting of bronze or sketch architectural blueprints. He quickly excelled at drawing, earning the admiration of his peers and even his teacher. In one of Verrocchio's commissions, the Baptism of Christ, it's said that Leonardo painted the angel on the left, so beautifully rendered that Verrocchio allegedly swore never to paint again. It's a story often told, perhaps romanticized, but it speaks to a larger truth. Even as a teenager, Leonardo's talent could not be ignored. His drawings possessed a softness, a realism, a humanity that set them apart. But it wasn't just skill that defined him, it was curiosity. Boundless, restless, insatiable curiosity. He began to keep notebooks, at first simple sketches, then more elaborate diagrams and observations. He wrote about the movement of water, the anatomy of horses, the way smoke curled through air. He filled pages with mirror writing, a habit some say was to keep his thoughts secret, though it's just as likely a natural quirk of his left-handedness. Leonardo was a young man of contradictions, handsome yet humble, brilliant yet cautious. He dressed well, played music, and told jokes, but also kept to himself, preferring the company of ideas. He had no formal schooling in Latin or mathematics, two disciplines essential to most scholars of the time. This would later hold him back in certain circles. But it also gave him a different kind of lens. To Leonardo, knowledge was not something you acquired through books. It was something you touched, felt, questioned, and lived. By the time he was in his early 20s, his apprenticeship had ended. He was now a fully qualified master in the Guild of St. Luke. And with that, the boy from Vinci began to make his own way in the world. He started receiving commissions, building a reputation for precision and vision. Yet even as success beckoned, Leonardo remained restless. He was not content to be simply a painter. He wanted to explore the mechanisms of life itself. But first, he had to prove himself. And so, the next chapter of his life would begin, not in Florence, but in Milan, a city of military ambition, intellectual hunger, and royal courts. It was there, far from the olive groves of his youth, that Leonardo da Vinci would begin to craft his legacy, not just as an artist, but as one of the most extraordinary minds in human history. Florence in the late 15th century was no ordinary city. It was the cradle of the Renaissance, a swirling constellation of talent, ambition, and revolutionary ideas. To live here was to stand at the center of a new world being born. And in the middle of this revolution stood a young man in his 20s, quiet, observant, and already carrying the weight of something extraordinary. Leonardo da Vinci had completed his apprenticeship in the studio of Verrocchio. He had studied the human body, mastered the tools of the painter, and learned the alchemy of perspective. But now came the true test, to build a name of his own. In 1472, he was admitted to the Guild of St. Luke, Florence's official association of artists and doctors. It was an important step, a formal recognition of his status as a professional. But it was also just that, a beginning. The city was filled with rivals. Artists like Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, and Perugino all vied for commissions from wealthy patrons and public institutions. To stand out, Leonardo would have to do more than just paint well. He would have to offer something new. And he did. His early commissions show flashes of the genius to come. The Annunciation, painted around 1472, depicts the angel Gabriel arriving before Mary. The scene is hushed, sacred, luminous. But it's the details that arrest the eye, the way the angel's wings are modeled after bird anatomy, the mathematical precision of the tiled floor, the subtle suggestion of wind in the trees. To Leonardo, beauty lay in observation. He studied the world like a scientist, then reassembled it with the soul of a poet. Another early masterpiece, Ginevra de' Benci, breaks from tradition entirely. Here is not the distant, idealized woman so common in Renaissance portraits. Instead, we meet a real person, thoughtful, introspective, with eyes that seem almost burdened by knowledge. It was a revelation. Leonardo wasn't just painting faces. He was painting inner lives. But even as he attracted admiration, a pattern began to emerge, one that would follow him throughout his life. Many of his commissions went unfinished. Take the Adoration of the Magi. A grand and complex scene filled with dozens of figures, horses, and architectural ruins. It was meant to be a monumental altarpiece. But Leonardo abandoned it midway, leaving behind a swirling, chaotic sketch of what might have been. Why did he stop? Some say he was dissatisfied with the medium. Others point to his endless curiosity, how he would dive into a painting only to be distracted by a new mechanical invention or anatomical question. Still others suggest that Leonardo simply could not resist the pull of the unfinished, forever seeking perfection in a world that could not hold it. Whatever the reason, by the early 1480s, Leonardo had grown weary of Florence. He was respected, yes, but not celebrated. And for a man of his imagination, the city's constraints began to chafe. He dreamed of more than paintings. He wanted to build machines, design bridges, plan cities. And so, with a portfolio of drawings in hand, Leonardo made a bold move. He left Florence for Milan, a city not known for its artistic scene, but for its military power and engineering marvels. There, he offered himself not as a painter, but as a military engineer. In a now famous letter to Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, Leonardo listed his talents with confident precision. He could design siege weapons, fortify cities, divert rivers, build armored vehicles and portable bridges. Only at the end of the letter did he mention, almost as an afterthought, that he could also paint. It was a masterstroke of self-presentation. Leonardo knew Milan's priorities, and he knew how to position himself. Sforza hired him, not immediately for his paintings, but for his potential as a court polymath. It was a defining moment. In Milan, Leonardo found the space he craved. The court provided him with income, housing, assistance, and, most crucially, time. Here, he began work on what would become one of his most iconic paintings, The Last Supper. But before that, he immersed himself in a dizzying array of projects. He designed an elaborate mechanical theater for court festivities. He studied geometry under the mathematician Luca Pacioli. He wrote treatises on flight, optics, and the motion of water. He dissected cadavers at local hospitals, an activity that was technically forbidden but quietly tolerated. He even began work on a massive bronze equestrian statue intended to honor the Duke's father. The design was ambitious, a 24-foot-high horse cast entirely in bronze. No one had ever attempted such a feat before. Leonardo built a full-size clay model and prepared molds. But just as he was ready to cast it, war broke out. The bronze was melted down to make cannons. The statue was never completed. Still, even in failure, Leonardo left an impression. His vision had outpaced his time, but not his ambition. By the end of the 1480s, Leonardo was no longer just a Florentine artist. He was a court intellectual, an engineer, a designer of pageants, a scientific thinker. He was becoming something rare, even in the Renaissance, a man who refused to be defined by a single skill. And yet, even in Milan, success came with frustration. Commissions stalled. Political tensions brewed. And Leonardo, ever restless, began to question his place. What did it mean to be a man of so many talents in a world that demanded results? Could imagination alone sustain a life? As the 1490s wore on, Leonardo would face his greatest artistic triumph and the beginning of a long period of wandering. The journey ahead would test his resolve, his patience, and his will to keep creating in the face of constant disruption. But first, he would paint a wall in a Milanese monastery and forever change the way the world saw the moment of betrayal. By the dawn of the 1490s, Leonardo da Vinci had secured a rare position: court artist, engineer, and visionary at the ducal court of Milan. But even as his talents blossomed, the world around him began to shift, and not always in his favor. The city of Milan, under the rule of Ludovico Sforza, was a place of ambition and instability. Courts were theaters of power, where alliances could fray overnight and fortunes could vanish with a sword's whisper. Leonardo, ever the outsider, navigated it cautiously. He kept journals instead of allies. He observed court life with the eye of a scientist, sketching its rituals, its costumes, its contradictions. But in the midst of this uncertain world, he was handed the opportunity of a lifetime. In the refectory of the Dominican convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, the Duke commissioned a mural, a grand religious work meant to celebrate faith and family. The subject, the Last Supper. Leonardo approached the project not as a mere painting, but as a study in human psychology, spatial geometry, and divine symbolism. Rather than depict a static, solemn supper, he captured the exact moment Jesus announces, "One of you will betray me." The apostles are caught mid-reaction, shock, denial, accusation, confusion. Each expression is unique, deeply felt, unmistakably human. The composition is mathematical, a vanishing point behind Christ's head, an architectural halo of balance and calm amid chaos. Light and shadow dance across the table in perfect harmony. But while the image was revolutionary, the execution was flawed. Leonardo, seeking to blend the detail of oil painting with the speed of fresco, experimented with a new technique, painting on dry plaster instead of wet. It allowed him time to refine details, but it didn't last. Even within his own lifetime, the paint began to flake. Within decades, it had begun to decay. It was a paradox that would follow him. Moments of staggering brilliance, undermined by the fragility of materials, of politics, of time. While The Last Supper brought him acclaim, Leonardo's fortunes were increasingly entangled with those of Ludovico Sforza, and Sforza's power was faltering. By the late 1490s, Milan faced growing threats from France. Charles VIII had already invaded Italy once. Louis XIV would soon follow. The court that once celebrated Da Vinci's machines and performances now prepared for siege. And then, in 1499, the hammer fell. French forces captured Milan. The Duke fled. The court dissolved. Leonardo was left adrift. He had spent nearly 2 decades building a life in Milan. Now he was a wandering genius, without patron, without commission, and once again, without a home. So he moved. First to Mantua, where he drew a striking portrait of Isabella d'Este, though the full painting was never completed. Then to Venice, where he advised military leaders on how to defend against Turkish invasions by engineering canals and flood barriers. But these were temporary stations. What he craved, what he always craved, was space to think, to build, to imagine. In 1500, he returned briefly to Florence. It was a changed city, but still pulsing with artistic life. Here, he would reconnect with old rivals and meet a young upstart named Michelangelo. It was during this return that Leonardo took on one of the most ambitious but ultimately doomed projects of his career, the Battle of Anghiari. The commission came from the Florentine government. Leonardo was tasked with painting a massive fresco in the Palazzo Vecchio, a depiction of a chaotic cavalry skirmish from Florence's past. Once again, Leonardo experimented with technique. He tried to create a new method for applying paint to the wall, heating it with open flames to dry it quickly. But the method backfired. The pigments ran, the wall bubbled. The great fresco melted before his eyes. Only preparatory sketches and a few copies by other artists remain. But those sketches reveal a Leonardo unleashed, horses rearing, faces contorted in rage, limbs tangled in a blur of battle, a storm of emotion and motion. Even in failure, the vision was unforgettable. And failure was something Leonardo knew intimately. He left countless projects incomplete, altarpieces half done, inventions only sketched, commissions abandoned. But these were not the failures of laziness. They were the symptoms of a mind that moved too fast for the world to catch up. He wanted to know everything: how the heart worked, how birds flew, how light bent, how sound echoed, how water eroded stone. He dissected human corpses in hidden rooms, not for shock value, but to understand the truth of the human form. He filled notebooks with cross-sections of skulls, curled embryos, muscle groups, and organs. Images so precise they could serve a medical student today. And all of it was done in silence. Much of it unpublished, unshared. Because for Leonardo, knowledge was not just a means to an end. It was the end itself. But the world demanded results. Patrons expected finished paintings. Governments expected machines. And while Leonardo's name continued to carry weight, his reputation was haunted by an uncomfortable truth. The master who began everything and finished little. By the turn of the century, he was entering his late 40s. Most men in his era would have been winding down, but Leonardo was about to enter perhaps the most prolific and profound phase of his life. He would paint the most iconic portrait in human history. He would sketch machines that would inspire generations of inventors, and he would redefine what it meant to be a human being in search of truth. The next chapter begins with a woman whose smile would outlive empires. In the first years of the 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci stood on the threshold of greatness and solitude. He was now in his late 40s, an age when many artists of the Renaissance had already secured their legacies. But for Leonardo, the most iconic chapter was only just beginning. In Florence once again, Leonardo returned to a city transformed. Political power had shifted. The Medici family had fallen and risen again, and in their shadow, a younger generation of artists was rising too. Among them, a moody and muscular Michelangelo and the brilliant, precocious Raphael. Leonardo was no longer the upstart prodigy, he was the master, and yet, rather than settle into fame, he continued to push into uncharted territory. It was during this time, around 1503, that he accepted a private commission to paint a portrait of a woman named Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a Florentine merchant. Her name would soon be forgotten, but her image would become immortal. We know her as the Mona Lisa. At first glance, it's a small, unassuming painting, no grand scenery, no mythical subjects, just a woman seated calmly with folded hands and a slight, elusive smile. But the genius lies in the subtlety. Leonardo used a technique known as sfumato, meaning softened or smoky, to blur the lines between light and shadow. There are no harsh edges, no sharp contours. Her face emerges gradually from the background, like a figure from a dream. Her expression is famously unreadable. Is she smiling, sad, thoughtful, detached? The mystery has captivated viewers for centuries. And Leonardo worked on the painting for years. He carried it with him from city to city, refining it long after the original commission had ended. To him, it was not just a portrait, it was a culmination of technique, of observation, of soul. But Mona Lisa was only one thread in a vast tapestry of work. At the same time, Leonardo was diving deeper into the natural world, measuring, drawing, dissecting. His anatomical studies during this period were astonishing in detail and ambition. He dissected human corpses, at least 30, possibly more, often in secret, recording every muscle, organ, and tendon with surgical precision. His cross-sections of the heart showed how valves worked. He illustrated the mechanics of the spine. He even mapped the movement of a fetus inside the womb. These were not artistic flourishes. They were scientific discoveries, centuries ahead of their time. Leonardo believed that to paint the human body, one must first understand its structure. But more than that, he was driven by a deeper urge to know how life functioned down to its smallest gears. He filled notebook after notebook with sketches and theories, sometimes covering an entire page with backwards handwriting. He wrote from right to left, possibly because he was left-handed, but perhaps also to keep his ideas private. And what ideas they were! He designed flying machines inspired by bats and birds. He sketched helicopters, parachutes, and gliders. He envisioned a tank, a turtle-shaped armored vehicle with rotating cannons. He drew blueprints for a robot knight that could stand, sit, and wave its arms. He designed bridges that could be assembled in hours, canals that could be redirected to flood enemy forces, gears and pulleys that mimicked nature's elegance, all of it on paper, almost none of it built. Because the world wasn't ready, his inventions remained theoretical, his ideas too advanced for the materials and understanding of the time, and yet, even in stillness, they spoke of motion. Leonardo saw what others could not. He looked at birds and imagined flight. He studied the ripple of water and saw turbines. He examined the human body and saw a divine machine. This was the essence of Leonardo's genius, not just the ability to create beauty, but the ability to reveal truth. And he never stopped. He continued to work for powerful patrons. For Cesare Borgia, he served as a military engineer, designing fortresses and maps with uncanny accuracy. His work from this period included some of the earliest examples of modern cartography, drawn from observation, not assumption. For the Medici, he worked as an architect and advisor. He consulted on projects ranging from irrigation to theatrical stage design. But even as he climbed the ladder of courtly prestige, Leonardo remained, in many ways, alone. He took on students, most famously Francesco Melzi, who had become his closest companion. But he never married, never had children. His notebooks contain no confessions of romantic love, only fragments of poetry and philosophy. He once wrote, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a well-employed life brings a happy death." And by the 1510s, Leonardo was beginning to feel the limits of time. His health began to falter. His right hand trembled. Painting became more difficult, but his mind never dimmed. In 1516, at the age of 64, Leonardo accepted an invitation from King Francis III of France. The offer was generous: a home near the royal chateau at Amboise, the title of Premier Painter and Engineer of the King, and a promise of comfort in his final years. Leonardo crossed the Alps one last time, bringing with him some of his greatest works, including the Mona Lisa. He lived in the Château de Clos-Lucé, a manor nestled among trees and gardens. There, he welcomed artists, scholars, and curious visitors. He sketched and wrote until his hands could no longer obey him. He talked with the king, walked the woods, reflected on a life of impossible vision. And as his health declined, he arranged his affairs, entrusting his manuscripts, his tools, his unfinished dreams to those who would carry them forward. He died on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67. Legend holds that he passed away in the arms of King Francis himself. Whether myth or memory, it speaks to the reverence he had earned, even from royalty. Leonardo was buried nearby in the chapel of Saint-Hubert under a simple stone. But his real monument was not carved in marble. It was drawn and painted and imagined. It was written in mirrored script, shaded in charcoal, painted in oils, and hidden in pages that would take centuries to understand. In an age that divided art from science, Leonardo saw only unity. He believed that truth and beauty were two sides of the same coin, and he chased them both endlessly. And in doing so, he became more than a man. He became a mirror of possibility. To understand Leonardo da Vinci is to enter not just the pages of history, but the corridors of a mind unlike any other. He has been called a genius, a polymath, a Renaissance man. But what did it mean to be Leonardo? To live inside that mind, to walk in his footsteps, to wake up every morning carrying the burden of insatiable curiosity. He left behind no memoirs. No confessional letters, no sweeping autobiographies. What we know comes from the margins of his notebooks, fragments of reflection, glimpses of humor, the occasional aphorism. And yet, from those fragments, a portrait emerges. He was striking in appearance, tall for his time, with flowing hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Vasari, the Renaissance biographer, described him as divinely beautiful. He dressed in fine clothing, often in bright colors, not with vanity, but with grace. He was known to be charming, witty, courteous. He played the lyre, sang, told riddles. People were drawn to him, not just for his talent, but for the way he listened, the way he watched. He loved animals, refusing to eat them, even at a time when vegetarianism was virtually unheard of. One story claims he would purchase caged birds at market, only to set them free. He believed all life was worthy of respect, but he was also private, often solitary, a man of contradictions. He could be obsessively focused, spending days perfecting a single detail, then abandon a project entirely if inspiration waned. He hated routine, avoided bureaucracy, and recoiled from the narrow-mindedness of institutions. He rarely finished what he started, but when he did, the results transcended time. He was left-handed. He wrote backwards. He measured time by the movement of shadows and water. He slept in short bursts. He carried sketchbooks everywhere. And he watched. He watched clouds form, water swirl, branches twist. He watched how lips curved when someone smiled, how a foot landed when it walked. He recorded what others missed, then reimagined it into art, into invention, into knowledge. His notebooks reveal a mind that couldn't stop turning. One page might show a study of a horse's hoof. The next, a design for a flying machine. The next, a shopping list. Buy candles, see if the barber has leeches, ask the apothecary about ox bile. He wrote notes to himself, sometimes urgent, sometimes philosophical. Learn to draw the muscles of the shoulder. Describe the tongue of the woodpecker. Why does the sky appear blue? Nothing was too small, nothing unworthy of wonder. He called himself a disciple of experience. He distrusted pure theory, preferring to test things with his own hands and eyes. And while he moved in circles of wealth and nobility, he never sought power for its own sake. He had no titles, no heirs, no empire. What he built lived on paper and canvas, and in the minds of those who came after. Leonardo's sexuality remains a mystery, but history offers clues. In 1476, he was anonymously accused of sodomy, an offense punishable by death. He was acquitted due to lack of evidence, but the trauma of public scrutiny may have marked him deeply. He never married. He left no record of romantic involvement with women. He surrounded himself with young male assistants, including Salai, a mischievous companion with whom he lived for years. Was it love, friendship, professional bond? We don't know, and perhaps that's fitting. For Leonardo was a man who revealed the world, but guarded himself. He was spiritual, but not rigid. He believed in a divine order, one woven through the laws of nature. He once wrote, "Nature is the source of all true knowledge. She has no effect without cause, nor invention without necessity." To him, faith and science were not opposites. They were reflections of the same truth. Even in his old age, when his body weakened and painting became difficult, he continued to study, to learn, to dream. One of his final notebook entries reads simply, "Just as a well-filled day brings happy sleep, so a well-employed life brings a happy death." It's hard to imagine a life more fully employed. He explored the cosmos through pigment and pen. He searched for the soul in the curve of a smile and the mechanics of a heart. And in doing so, he became not only the mirror of the Renaissance, but the mirror of what it means to be human. A mind forever reaching, a heart forever wondering, and a name forever remembered. By 1516, Leonardo da Vinci was entering the final chapter of his life. He was 64 years old. an age few reached in his time, and his body, once steady and agile, had begun to fail him. His right hand trembled. Some believe it was the result of a stroke. Others suggest nerve damage. Whatever the cause, painting became a struggle. His brush, once so fluid and precise, could no longer dance across canvas with the same grace. But even as his physical strength waned, his mind remained alert. His reputation had reached across borders. And when King Francis I of France extended an invitation, Leonardo accepted. It was a generous offer. The title of Premier Painter and Engineer and Architect to the King, a pension and residence in the Château de Clos-Lucé, a quiet manor near the royal court in Amboise. Leonardo crossed the Alps once again, this time with 3 of his most cherished possessions: his notebooks, the Mona Lisa, and his devoted companion Francesco Melzi. He brought no armies, no riches, no entourage, only ideas. At Clos-Lucé, the final years of Leonardo's life unfolded in peace. He was treated with honor. King Francis, still in his 20s, saw in Leonardo not just a painter or engineer, but a living legend. The 2 men became close. Francis often visited him, walking the gardens, discussing philosophy, invention, art. The young king saw in the old master a window into the Renaissance itself, a bridge between wisdom and ambition. Leonardo continued to draw and write. He advised on court pageants and engineering designs. He sketched mechanical wonders, as if his imagination had never aged. He also reflected. His notebooks from this period are tinged with contemplation of nature, of time, of the soul. One passage reads, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so life well used brings happy death." He knew the end was near, but he greeted it without fear. On May 2nd, 1519, Leonardo da Vinci passed away at Clos-Lucé. According to legend, he died in the arms of King Francis himself, a story likely apocryphal but widely believed in spirit. For the king mourned him deeply. Leonardo's body was laid to rest in the chapel of Saint-Hubert, not far from the chateau. The stone that marked his grave would be lost for centuries, later destroyed in war and rebuilt in homage. He left behind no children, no estate, only a staggering legacy. His notebooks, over 7,000 pages of drawings, diagrams, and thoughts, were entrusted to Melzi. They would be scattered, sold, lost, and eventually rediscovered. Many were never published in his lifetime. Much of his knowledge, the anatomy, the mechanics, the flight designs, remained hidden for centuries. And yet, Leonardo's influence rippled forward. Because in every sketch of a helicopter, in every diagram of a heart valve, in every whisper of the Mona Lisa's smile, his voice endures. He did not conquer kingdoms. He did not write manifestos or lead revolutions. He observed, he imagined, he created. And in doing so, he changed what it meant to see. The man from Vinci, illegitimate, curious, and quietly brilliant, died far from the land of his birth. But his mind never truly left us. It still flickers on the page, in the brush stroke, in the sketch of a bird's wing, and it still reminds us that to be human is to wonder, to seek, to imagine. When Leonardo da Vinci died in 1519, few could have imagined the scale of his legacy. He was respected, admired, even revered by kings. But much of what he had created was still hidden, scattered, unfinished. He had published nothing. Most of his inventions had never been built. His notebooks remained in private hands, his scientific insights largely unknown. To the world of his time, Leonardo was a brilliant painter and a curious mind. But to the centuries that followed, he would become something more. A symbol of human possibility, his artworks alone would have guaranteed his place in history. The Mona Lisa, stolen in 1911 and recovered 2 years later, became a global icon, not just of art, but of mystery. Her smile, her gaze, the ambiguous serenity, She has been called the most visited, most written about, most sung about painting in the world. The Last Supper, despite its deterioration, continues to inspire awe. It revolutionized the way narrative and perspective were handled in religious art. And yet, painting was only one facet of Leonardo's brilliance. Over the centuries, his notebooks, slowly recovered and studied, revealed the true scale of his genius. They contain some of the earliest anatomical studies that rival modern medical diagrams, detailed engineering sketches of gears, pumps, and machines, many of which predate their actual invention by hundreds of years. Concepts for flight, including parachutes, gliders, and rotor-powered vertical devices, precursors to the helicopter. He studied optics, geology, hydrodynamics, mechanics, architecture, and astronomy. And unlike many thinkers of his time, he grounded these studies not in speculation, but in observation. For Leonardo, the world was not just a canvas. It was a machine, a riddle, a poem. As the Renaissance gave way to the Enlightenment, thinkers and inventors began to rediscover his notes. Slowly, Leonardo shifted from being seen as a gifted artist to a visionary, universal mind. He became the embodiment of the Renaissance man, a person who seeks knowledge in every field, who refuses to be confined to a single discipline. Today, we live in a world Leonardo imagined. A world of flying machines and human anatomy, of water-powered turbines and city planning, of detailed mapping and mechanical automation. We speak of artificial intelligence, robotics, aeronautics, biotechnology, and in Leonardo's pages, we find sketches that prefigured all of them. Modern engineers have built working models of his machines. Medical students still marvel at the accuracy of his dissections. Artists continue to learn from his compositions, his lighting, his understanding of human form. His notebooks, once scattered across Europe, now reside in museums and collections. The Codex Atlanticus in Milan, the Codex Leicester, once owned by Bill Gates, the Royal Collection at Windsor, each a fragment of a mind that refused to stay still. Leonardo's legacy is not only in what he discovered, but in how he thought. He taught us that science and art are not separate pursuits, but twin lenses through which we understand the world. He believed observation was sacred, that truth lies in nature, that curiosity is the engine of progress. In an age divided by specialization, Leonardo remains a model for integration, a reminder that the poet and the physicist, the sculptor and the surgeon, all live within the same body. He has become more than historical. He is archetypal, referenced in films, novels, and documentaries, immortalized in video games and best-selling thrillers, debated, dissected, even mythologized. And yet, beneath all the fame, the truth remains profoundly human. Leonardo da Vinci was a man who wondered, who stared into the mechanisms of birds and machines, who saw in the human face not just beauty, but mystery, who believed, even as war raged and cities burned, that knowledge mattered, that art could elevate the soul, that the universe, however vast, could be understood, one sketch at a time. 500 years have passed since Leonardo da Vinci walked the earth, and yet he is still with us, in the museums that display his art, in the laboratories that echo his sketches, in every airplane that lifts off the ground, in every artificial heart valve that saves a life, in every curious child who asks, how does it work? We live in the world Leonardo imagined, one shaped by invention, driven by discovery, and inspired by wonder. In many ways, the challenges he faced are still with us. The pull between creativity and practicality, the tension between speed and depth, the temptation to specialize when the soul wants to explore everything. And perhaps that is why Leonardo da Vinci continues to resonate. Because he reminds us that knowledge is not a destination, but a journey. That imagination has value, that questions are as powerful as answers. He was not without flaws. He could be distracted, elusive, obsessive. He left projects unfinished, struggled with deadlines, and often worked alone. But his failures were a byproduct of the same force that made him great, an untamed, unapologetic curiosity. He once wrote, "Learning never exhausts the mind." And in those words, we find his soul. Today, in a world of speed and surface, Leonardo da Vinci stands as a beacon of depth and reflection. He reminds us to look closely, to think deeply, to notice how light falls across a face, to ask how a bird flies, to see the connections between art and anatomy, nature and numbers, science and soul. And above all, he reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is itself an act of beauty. From a small village in Tuscany came a man who captured the smile of a woman and the motion of the heavens, who mapped the veins of the body and the flight paths of birds, who stood at the crossroads of observation and imagination, and drew the future. He didn't build empires, he didn't conquer nations, he simply asked questions and dared to answer them. Thank you for watching. Your support helps us continue telling the stories that shaped our world, through triumphs, tragedies, revolutions, and reckonings. We'll journey through the lives of visionaries, villains, rulers, rebels, and the ordinary people who lived through extraordinary times. Because history isn't always heroic, but it is always human. If you enjoyed this video, we'd be truly grateful if you'd give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and explore some of the other stories we've brought to life. Join us for the next chapter. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.